Hey, welcome back, y'all. Today we're going to be going over the elbow. So our elbow is a hinge joint, but it has a little bit more than that, and we're going to break it down, the bony anatomy, muscular anatomy, and ligamentous stuff. So hopefully it makes a little bit more sense. It's a pretty simple joint, you guys. It's not super duper interesting, but we have it and we need it, right? So first off, it's made up of three bones. We have our humerus, that's our long bone in the upper arm. Some bony landmarks you want to make sure you know are the capitulum, which articulates with the radius, the trochlea, which articulates with the ulna, and the medial and lateral epicondyles, which serve as origins for many of our flexor and extensor muscles. And also the olecranon fossa, which you'll get actually a pretty cool shot of the olecranon on the diagnostic ultrasound at the end of this video. This is a pretty neat shot. It's not something you really get to see that often. Um, let's see. Yeah, the ulna. Speaking of the olecranon, you have the olecranon process, which inserts into the olecranon fossa on the humerus. The coronoid process, not to be confused with the coracoid. Coracoid is close to your collarbones. Coronoid is at your elbow, right? It's stupid. Um, and we have the trochlear notch, which is going to form, a hinge with the trochlea. And we have the ulnar tuberosity, which is the insertion for the brachialis muscle. We have the radius, which we have our radial head, radial neck, and radial tuberosity. Radial head is going to articulate with the capitulum and radial notch the ulna. The neck is, a narrow segment just below the head. And radial tuberosity is the insertion point for the biceps brachii. So that's something to consider. Is that your biceps actually insert onto the radius, and if you picture that on your arm, right? The boot, let's draw a little arm right here so I can get drawn today. Um, so here's your bicep tendon right here, and then this is your radius, right? Wait a minute. Sorry, I just to make sure where the thumb is. Okay. All right, so this is our radius, and we have our biceps right here. I'll draw this in red so it makes a little bit more sense. So this is our radius. Biceps kind of do like this, right? So you can see how my hand's like this. I know that my background blurred, so I might not be able to see my hand. But since it's on the radius, you can see how if it shortens, if my bicep shortens, it would function in actually supinating my hand, right? Because we know the biceps play a role in supination. It's a little bit you would almost expect, right? Well, if my radius is out here and and my bicep shortens, you would almost think pronation, right? But you can feel for yourself why it's supination, and it just has to do with the fact that it's attached relatively close to the radial ulnar rate radio ulnar articulation, right? And you'll see it. You'll see it happen if you take your hand and you supinate it. You see your bicep shorten, right? But also, if I were to draw this a little bit better, we would actually see the biceps tendon when your arm is pretty extended like that. The biceps tendon is almost like kind of wrapping underneath the radius, so that when it shortens, your bicep is shortened, it more powerfully supinates in a bent elbow position. But yeah, it's because it's kind of wrapped under the radius a little bit, so you contract your bicep, it'll twist the radius right into supination. If that makes sense. Whereas if it was over top, it would be a little bit different as far as how that would work. So got a little sidetracked there, but these bones are going to form three articulations within one joint capsule. We have the humeral-ulnar joint, which is our hinge joint for flexion extension, humeral-radial joint, which is going to participate in flexion extension and a little bit of rotation, and our proximal radial-ulnar joint, which is going to allow for pronation and supination. So some ligaments we want to talk about right here are the UCL, ulnar collateral ligament. It connects to the medial epicondyle of the humerus and the ulna. Um, it has different parts: anterior band, posterior band, and transverse band. Anterior is gonna be the strongest and resist our valgus stretch. Posterior is going to be taut when we're in a flex position, and our transverse band is going to connect two parts of the ulna. It's very This is the one we talk about with the whole Tommy John injury. I'm sure you've heard before. Every baseball pitcher at some point is going to have to get that surgery, it seems like. We also have radial collateral ligament, RCL. It's going to connect the lateral epicondyle to the annular ligament and the radial notch. It's going to resist our varus stretch. Annular ligament, like I just mentioned, encircles the radial head, anchoring it to the ulna. So that's just going to be like a little dude, just does this. Um, oh yeah, and it's also going to, when we pronate and supinate, it's going to allow that rotation and kind of keep everything contained, right? The joint capsule is going to enclose all three of these joints, and it's reinforced anteriorly and posteriorly by muscle tendons and fascia, of course. Now we're going to talk about some muscles. We have our flexor muscles, the biceps brachii. The long head is going to originate on the supraglenoid tubercle of the scapula, and the short head is going to originate on the coracoid process. So what's interesting about that is the long head is actually biarticular. Even though they both are originating kind of from the scapular area, it works a little bit like this. Like here's the head of your humerus, and here's that bicipital groove in there. And then we have the coracoids kind of right here. So if we draw the long head, of your biceps, kind of down here, goes through right there, passes straight through the shoulder joint, right? But the short head, it's right here and kind of goes around your shoulder joint almost and doesn't really get a lot of action. And so it's not technically biarticular, right? And they both insert onto that radial tuberosity and bicipital aponeuroses. And function, of course, elbow flexion and powerful supination, pronation, supination. Supination, you can hold soup. um, Brachialis, a often overlooked muscle of the biceps, gives them that sort of thick look if you work them out. This is going to be in the distal half of the anterior humerus. That's where it originates and it inserts onto the ulnar tuberosity. It is a pure elbow flexor, and pretty much regardless of forearm position, it's always going to have some sort of leverage, right? Then we have the brachioradialis. It's going to originate on the lateral supracondylar ridge of the humerus and insert into the styloid process of the radius. And its function, flexion, with the forearms in a semi-pronated position. You can think thumbs up. But what's interesting about it is radial deviation is also a function of the forearm, right? So if you do like this, I mean of the brachioradialis, right? So if you do like that, you can see it moving, right? But it also does this. So when you do your hammer curls, that's your brachioradialis right there. Doing a lot of that work. Now let's talk about the extensor muscles of the elbow, the back. Of course, we have the triceps brachii, long head, infraglenoid tubercle of the scapula, and the lateral head, the posterior humerus above the radial groove, and the medial head, posterior humerus below the radial groove, right? And the insert onto the olecranon process of the ulna. And it's your primary elbow extensor. The long head also assists in shoulder extension, right? Interestingly, okay, there's been big debates about a couple of movements. We have like your overhead tricep extensions, right? And dumbbell pullovers or cable pullovers or whatever. The first instance, people were arguing in science, right? Whether the long head of the triceps grew more from an overhead position or whether it's better to have them down by your side. And if you understand active and passive insufficiency, you kind of understand that there's not a good answer to that question. Since we're right here and the long head of the triceps is going to be pretty stretched, as long as it's fixed, it's contributing to that movement, right? It might be suffer a little bit from passive insufficiency back here where it's more lengthened, but as you move up, it's going to have more of an advantage. Conversely, down here, if you're doing your tricep pushdowns, it might suffer from a little bit of active insufficiency at the bottom, but throughout the rest of the range of motion, it's contributing pretty well. So it actually doesn't matter that much in the long run. And it's a bit, what's the word? I guess pedantic to try and say that one is for sure better than the other, right? You're going to wind up doing both anyways in most programs. The other funny thing is, dumbbell pullovers and whatnot. The triceps are a pretty huge contributor to that. And that's a different conversation because you're dealing with, like if in a dumbbell pullover, there's a ton of resistance here, there's no resistance here. How much are the triceps contributing, right? Compared to other muscles which extend the shoulder. That's a fun debate to dive into if you're interested. Then, of course, we have little baby anconeus. On the lateral epicondyle of the humerus, it inserts into the lateral aspect of the olecranon and proximal ulna. Its function assists triceps extension, stabilizes the elbow, especially during pronation and supination transitions. So it's going to be especially active if you've ever seen someone doing um, like a tricep extension, right? Where they're rotating their wrist a little bit. There's a little bit sort of a almost that sort of action. I don't know if you can see my hand. But if there's any sort of pronation and supination going on when you're extending your tricep, another example I'm trying to think of, shot put could probably be an example. You're kind of coming like right here, right there, right? It's this little stabilizer muscle. It's almost kind of like the popliteus in a way in the knee, right? And then let's go a little bit below the elbow and talk about our pronators and supinators. The elbow's rotational capacity, pronation and supination is a function of the proximal and distal radial ulnar joints. The elbow is the axis, right? So the supinator muscle. Well, can you guess what that does? It originates on the lateral epicondyle and supinator crest of the ulna, inserts to the proximal third of the radius, wraps around the lateral surface, and functions supinates the forearms, especially in low resistance movements. So whereas your biceps are probably going to contribute more so to that gross movement if you're ever trying to forcefully supinate something, it's going to be doing most of that. But if it's a light supination, the small little supinator muscles contribution will be relatively higher. It will never be stronger than your biceps, but kind of think of it like this. If you are turning, a key, right? Your supinator will contribute more to that percentage of force wise. But if you have to, you know, crank something, right? Um, really, your biceps and other supinator muscles are going to do most of that work, and its assistance is only going to be supplemental. Biceps brachii again, especially the short head, becomes dominant in high power supination, like tightening a screw, right? And then pronator teres, honestly, one of my favorite muscles, just because it's so cool. If you ever look at arm wrestlers, they have like giant pronator teres muscles, and it's pretty hard to miss. Go look at a picture of Devin Larratt, and you'll see a giant pronator teres. It's crazy. It looks freakish. It originates on the humeral head, on the medial epicondyle, and also the coronoid process of the ulna. And it inserts into the mid shaft of the lateral radius. Function: pronates the forearm and weakly flexes the elbow, right? And a lot of these muscles, you can kind of know what they do just by looking at them. So if we look at the pronator teres right here, it pretty much just looks like this. Let me just go ahead and draw our, oh my gosh, that's so bad. Our ulna in there. This is basically what it looks like. It's just a muscle that goes boop, boop, right? And so you see if that muscle shortens, it's going to shorten this way, and it's going to take my hand and move thumb side down. Like, doesn't get more simple than that. You know what I mean? And then you have your pronator quadratus. So that's basically going to be the same muscle. It's going to quadratus, you know what I mean? So it's going to have four sides to it, but it's going to be in the distal quarter of the anterior radius. And it originates on the ulna. So basically, again, this same sort of deal. And it's going to be the primary pronator for the distal radial ulnar joint. And it's going to do the same exact thing, right? So like, what's the difference why I have two? Number one, I mean, it's just stability thing. But if we think about, when would we pronate more distally, when we pronate more um distally, proximally, right? Think about how arm wrestling looks, right? Versus how turning a screw looks, right? And there's different degrees of elbow flexion there, and they're going to contribute pretty similarly. But that's something to consider whenever you do your upper extremity analysis, if there's any sort of forearm action in there. So let's talk about some accessory structures and tendons. We have our bicipital aponeurosis, which spreads medially across the cubital fossa. So that's just going to be kind of cubital is this area. So we're kind of this general area. We have the common flexor tendon, which originates from the medial epicondyle and gives rise to the flexor carpi radialis, palmaris longus, flexor carpi ulnaris, and flexor digitorum superficialis, which don't worry, we'll kind of go into those a little bit more in depth when we cover the wrist and hand. And we have the common extensor tendon, which originates from the lateral epicondyle, leading to extensor carpi radialis brevis, extensor digitorum, extensor digiti minimi, and extensor carpi ulnaris. So the key thing I want y'all to take away right there is that the two condyles of the, humerus right here, they're going to give way to common tendons, right, that are going to run down here into our wrist area. Anything else? Some bursae. You have your olecranon bursa, which is going to cushion the olecranon process, which can become inflamed from pressure. Student's elbow. That's a fun one. Resting your elbow on the table all the time can actually kind of inflame that bursa. So just some final closing thoughts right here. Elbow functions as a hinge and pivot, allowing flexion extension and pronation supination in harmony. Whether you're performing a clean and press, bracing a fall, or simply picking up a coffee mug, your elbow is going to coordinate these movements through precise joint mechanics and layered muscular control. Understanding the elbow joint to this level of detail is going to allow a kinesiologist to identify dysfunctions earlier, train more effectively, and rehabilitate with intention. Right, so we're going to get into some ultrasound videos right quick, just so you can get a more physical idea than my little scribbles right here. Hopefully that was semi-helpful. I know we kind of just yapped through some origins, insertions, and things. I would recommend actually going through and drawing it yourself. I know I could have probably drawn a little bit more for you today, but drawing is an exercise just so you kind of understand these things in 3D space, and then you can compartmentalize it in a 2D image in your head. Super duper helpful, especially as we dive into the wrist next week. It's going to get pretty hairy there, so that's going to be a good skill to have, but let's look at that ultrasound footage. So now we're going to take a look at some of the structures of the elbow. First off, the first thing I think when I think elbow is biceps. So if we look right in there, that ovalish structure in the middle is our biceps tendon. If we look down below that, that is the end of our humerus that we're looking at. So Tristan, if you would flex your bicep, there you go. You can see the tendon becomes more circular as we flex the bicep, and now relax. Good. All right, and if we come over to this side, we can see a cross section of our brachioradialis. This is an important flexor of the elbow joint, especially when our hand is in a semi-pronated position. And then if we go even further, you can see the cross section of the bicep. I just figured I'd show that since we showed brachioradialis. If we go a little bit further down, you can see it just barely at the bottom right there. That is that really bright white structure at the bottom. That is our ulna. And then right here to the outside, that bright structure is the radius. All right, now we're going to take a look at the back of the elbow. So if we look right there, that tendinous structure, that is our boy, the triceps tendon. Scanning right up here, we can see a cross section of the lateral tricep head. And then if we go over towards this side, we have the medial triceps head. This is the long head of the triceps. It's bigger. And then if we go right back here, so we can see the olecranon right there, that sort of beak type structure in our elbow.